Welcome to HOBI Conversations. I'm Steven Saunders. This podcast features the people leading our company and reshaping the ITAD industry in their own words. Real conversations about where the ITAD industry is headed, what it takes to lead in this space, and why doing this right matters more than ever. We're not here to narrate the industry, we're here to move it. If you're deep in this world, finding your footing, or just trying to understand where it's all headed, these conversations are for you. Let's get into it. How's it going, everybody? This is Steven with HOBI for HOBI Conversations, episode 3. Super excited for this one. We're here with Dean, our global transportation and logistics account manager. So he handles all things when it comes to transportation operations. His face is one of the first faces you see. So huge sports fan, scratch golfer. He won't tell you guys that, but he is. Don't hold him to it. But Dean, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey, I'm Dean Snitker, global account manager at HOBI International. I've worked at HOBI. This is my second stint at HOBI. The first stint was in sales for a few years, and then my second stint started as logistics, but ultimately the role segued to account management, transportation management. I've been here a good 15, 16 years. I'm very familiar with how the system runs, and I enjoy the company. I enjoy the people, and I like creating solutions for everyone. So it's been a really good fit.
That's awesome. I think this will be a really good episode. Just purely, people have a lot of questions about the operations and the inner workings of what we do. And a lot of what you do is that. So I would just say, I don't have 16 years of experience like you have, but in my time here, I've experienced ITAD comes down to just a battle of execution. Who can execute better? And there are so many different moving parts with the process as a whole, especially when you get into some of the international work. Could you explain where companies face the highest risk to their logistics and how HOBI is actively working to kind of alleviate all of that?
I think the highest risk you're going to encounter, obviously, it's going to be in your hard drives. I think that's step one. Realizing, okay, it's going to be in your hard drives, it's going to be in your data that you have. And then your most sensitive data, the most important data at any company is going to be in your data center. Pretty simplistic response, but it can be a very complex solution dependent on, because if you're a company and you're going through a refresh, obviously you're going to send someone into the location to do the deinstallation, and you're going to have some excess inventory, excess equipment, and you're going to want to make sure that the data on that equipment is either, if it's coming from your data center, it has to be destroyed, based on the client and based on client preference. Some clients prefer on-site data destruction. Other clients prefer to have the equipment wiped. So if it's going to be wiped, the most cost-efficient method would be send it to one of our processing facilities. But what isn't exactly cost-efficient, it's going to have to be a point-to-point shipment. It can't be a situation, and this will be a reoccurring maybe topic that we discuss as we talk through, account or ITAD, is you want to avoid the equipment going through multiple hands before it gets to a processing facility. Yeah, you really, if it goes from point A to point B, that's great. If it's a situation where it goes point A to point B to point C, it's tolerable if you have the right logistics, and if you have the right tracking mechanisms, if you have the right people, that's you're going to be able to manage it. But there's always risk, and I think a lot of people take into consideration, everyone has a different level of risk tolerance. The data center world doesn't have a risk tolerance. The risk tolerance is pretty high. It's really sensitive. It's a lion running at you at all times. So you want to do whatever you can to mitigate that and to prevent any type of security risk from even coming across the table or happening.
So let's just park it there. I know we're jumping ahead into our episode a little bit, but data center seems to be a huge when it comes to exposure. We're working with a lot of those projects right now. And data centers they're popping up everywhere, and the scale is Herculean. So from a logistical standpoint, where do you feel like companies are most at risk, like during literal decom? And what does safety and security look like from a HOBI process standpoint?
It's a really good question. I really want to give a lot of credit to operation teams that work work at all these companies. I want to say 95% of the teams I've worked with have been so good at really understanding what their inventory is. So that's maybe number one. What do you have? What is being deinstalled? And most of our clients, if not all, know exactly what's going to be deinstalled, and they're going to be able to tell us that, which is obviously very helpful for us. And because then if we know what equipment's moving from their location, we know how to take the proper steps to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So if it's, let's say, a location has they're deinstalling some really nice Dell servers that have X amount of hard drives. Let's say they have 300, 400 hard drives, and they don't want for those hard drives to leave the location. We're going to send in a team to do an on-site data destruction project. It'll only take a couple of hours, and then the remaining equipment after the data or the hard drives are destroyed, the shrapnel, the equipment goes to HOBI. HOBI's going to audit the remaining equipment and provide you with the results. And most clients will have a spreadsheet which identifies, okay, this is what we have, this is what we sent HOBI, and then you have the capability. There's a couple of methods, but you have the capability to compare and contrast what was processed and what's in your record, so that you're able to call it out, and then ultimately remove it from your books. So you remove it from your books from the operation side, but you also do it from the accounting side too, so that specific machines get amortized off on a monthly basis, etc. So those can finally be taken off your books. And so that's a positive. I hopefully didn't digress a little too much from your question. Do you have a follow-up there?
No, that's great. I think, and something I've been telling people too, when it comes to kind of the logistical side of even the data center stuff and some of the larger projects, is you want to get the responsibility on HOBI as quickly as possible. So the longer you take, the more the tracking assets and keeping a hold of that stuff, that would be your responsibility. But the quicker you can get it over to HOBI, chain of custody starts, and we can start to rock and roll, and then you can hold us accountable for where that comes in. So that comes into kind of the chain of custody question. That's been a huge talking point for me in the last few weeks. A lot of partners that we're working with are either in the government space or just have, as you said, just very low tolerance for risk. Like, it has to be like this, has to be compliant, has to be that. Can you talk through when this starts, so when a chain of custody starts, and what chain of custody looks like throughout the ITAD cycle, and what our customers can come to expect from us?
So chain of custody, it really does start when you actually present us with the job itself. Because what we're going to do is, and we're going to use a couple of tools, and really what we've been trying, and what we're always going to strive to get better at. I mean, we're fairly good right now, but we're always going to focus on reducing redundancy and creating automation as much as we possibly can. Because unfortunately, sometimes the more humans that get involved, the more things have a tendency to maybe not go perfectly. So when I say automation, there's an opportunity with some companies want for you to link into maybe one of their applications. And I'm not going to name any of the applications on this talk, but they have their database, which basically calls out what serial numbers they have at a specific location. And so they're going to say, well, we have all this information listed on this application. Can you connect with your database to our application so that we can link in, and when you audit and when you identify the serial number, it immediately is recognized in our system. And so that is something that we do offer, and that we have been providing that solution for a number of clients. And it's really a nice tool for everyone, because it really does take out some of the manual portion of it. Now, but when you talk about chain of custody, and when I start thinking about chain of custody, I start thinking about getting anything from where it is, let's say it's in Chicago and it has to go to Dallas. And let's say it's a very sensitive piece of equipment. So how are you going to make that happen? What are the correct steps? And so obviously the correct steps would be, the first step is having the client identify, this is what we have. And then the next step is going to say, okay, well, we're going to create a tool, or we're going to create a code in the HOBI database in order to track this item as it moves across from Chicago to Dallas. So we'll create the code, input the serial number of whatever that asset is, And then, let's say it's a point-to-point shipment. So we're going to, we're going to find a truck with a driver, and he's going to go from point A to point B. I mean, we'll
Yep.
make it fairly simple, but there will be tracking information involved. There's going to be GPS information. So, and basically the tracking and the GPS information are going to allow you to know exactly where that individual is within a fairly good radius of his route. Let's say, he's, crossing the border from Illinois into Kentucky or whatnot. You're going to have a really good idea of where he or she is located. And so that's part of the beauty of, I think, the future chain of custody that we're going to see a lot more of. I think a lot of, most of that is fairly close to real time. And I think in the next year or two, we're going to see it be true real time. And so where people really, really have, when you track something on, again, I'm not going to name any company, but a parcel shipment, you generally have a pretty good idea where that is. Let's say you buy, if you buy pants on Amazon, or if you buy books on Amazon, et cetera, you're going to know where that hub is. I think the future of that is to know exactly where that item is at all times.
Absolutely.
Now, talking about our example, a sensitive piece of equipment going from point A to point B. So we're going to know where that driver is at all times. And we're going to have the ability to contact that driver at any moment. And he's going to be monitored and tracked. And once the equipment gets to the destination, in this type of situation, you probably loaded the truck with equipment, and you sealed the truck. And on every piece of seal, which sealing a truck to me seems as if it's, I don't know, it's a little old school almost, but it's really effective, and that's why it's still around.
Yeah.
And so the seal number is identified on the bill of lading. The driver's going to take a picture of it. That shipment's going to get to Hobby, and then it's, whoever opens up the truck doors, obviously they're going to break the seal. They'll take a picture of it, match the seal number, and you're good to go.
I also think too, it's really cool. You've spent so much time diligently building a carrier network of guys that that you can call and be like, I've worked with this guy for years, and you can vouch. And I feel like that's not what a lot of companies can say in the realm of logistics, because there's so much volume to say, man, I know a lot of these guys, and I've spent time working with a lot of these guys.
It's one of the, it's one of the bonuses of working in the realm for 15 years, is that you are able to say, hey, I've worked with this guy. I can vouch for him. He's going to provide us with really good service. All of our carriers, we try to make sure that they're asset-based carriers. We like the mom and pops. We do recognize, though, there are instances where you're going to utilize a 3PL, and they're going to broker out a company. And so you can't sugarcoat it and say, you're always doing the asset-based carriers. Around the Chicagoland area, around Dallas, yeah, we're going to be able to do that. Around Arizona, definitely. If we have a super sensitive job in Chicago, we're going to be able to send a Hobby representative. Same with Dallas or Phoenix, Arizona. But let's say we are in, you can say Boise, Idaho. We're going to utilize a carrier that we have that, first of all, we vetted, and we vet it in a couple of different ways. Obviously, you get their DOT number, you look at their safety report for the last 3 years, and we're certified to do this. So every carrier, every vendor that we utilize, they have to be vetted, and 3-year history has to occur. And so, if there's a company that unfortunately doesn't have much of a history, you're probably better off maybe, giving them work that isn't sensitive prone. So let's say someone's just throwing out a bunch of keyboards, 100 keyboards, then maybe, yes, you vet them, they pass your standards, but they aren't the type of standards that you feel comfortable with in terms of providing them with data center equipment. And so that has to be recognized, and that's recognized by all our teams. And that won't be, and the correct steps will be taken to make sure the correct fits match with the necessary client.
Absolutely. And we talk about just the strength that we have. I mean, our 3 facilities spread throughout the U.S. and the power that gives us to kind of spread throughout the U.S. But then jump into the international stuff is a whole different animal.
It
And so
is.
you've touched the international channels just from the top, from all different sides. And that's where a lot of the compliance or and exposure really lives at. What changes the moment an asset goes into the overseas plans? How does Hobby keep the chain airtight? And when a device moves overseas, talk about R2V3 and those things and all of that, what our partner network looks like, just 30,000 foot view so our listeners can hear.
So we have a really good auditing team at Hobby, and that's really crucial when it comes to identifying teams that you're going to partner with. So, and the partners that we've had, we have a couple of them. One was in Czech. We have a couple, obviously, in the UK. It really, I don't want to say there's trial and error there because you're down in a situation where trial and error is you just can't live in a trial and error world. So,
Exactly. Risk
so
is too high.
yeah. So, and when you say R2V3, those are pretty high standards. They're very similar to the WE standards, which is in Europe. But, we're fortunate to have the auditing team. So if we meet an individual who represents an organization that's
Hmm.
located, they could be in Poland, they can be in Spain, they could be in France, they could be in South Africa. The first step is they have to get audited. And, we don't have our auditor on the line, but I can help kind of provide enough guidance. We're going to figure out where, obviously a percentage of the equipment that gets processed is going to be scrap. And that can be a situation you don't want your scrap equipment to go to a processor that's going to incorrectly dispose of it. I think, 13, 14 years ago, you had a lot of processors that were just sending material to China. That was a very popular thing for a lot of processors to do. We were Craig and Kathy, and I speak very highly of Craig and Kathy because they made sure that we were auditing all of our vendors, and they understood that you have to operate at a high degree of integrity and making sure that your equipment isn't going to be processed at a location that is going to where the material is going to get just burned in open environments
Right.
where those fires and the shrapnel and the remnants of that material ends up in water supplies. We've taken great strides to make sure that everything is done within the R2V3 realm. It used to be R2 responsible recycling, but then it's R2V3 responsible and recycling with value. And so, yeah, and that's speaking from my position. That was the biggest concern that I had is
Yeah.
what happens to all these wires after, are they going to be processed properly? And so again, that's where the auditor comes in. The auditor checks all of their channels, checks, goes to and sometimes when possible, goes to the facility, checks it out, and make sure that they're applying by our standards too. And that would be, that's probably one of the most crucial steps. And then at that point, you develop that relationship,
Hmm.
and you're able to, you give them your instructions. NIST 800-88 is obviously the standard wiping routine. And we expect for our processors to follow it. If a sector in a hard drive fails, we expect for that hard drive to be serialized, pulled, serialized, captured, and destroyed. And then the shrapnel, of course, from that hard drive goes to, responsible recycling facilities.
Yes.
And that's, something that since, there's a comfort level there because we've already audited it, but then that comfort level becomes even more, I'm trying to think of the right word here. Just you feel a little bit more secure when it happens again and again and again.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, and it's taken, when I jumped on the global account role, which was about, gosh, just aging myself left and right, 8 or 9 years ago, we were just kind of starting those phases. And,
Hmm.
and part of that is really understanding all your partners and understanding the people who work at those organizations. You quickly understand, okay, this is a very responsible individual. They
Hmm.
obviously care about what they're doing. They care about the environment, and you're able to identify who those people are.
Absolutely.
They give you good results. They give you good results in a couple of ways: by their audits that they provide you,
Hmm.
by their timeliness, if and by following your requirements. which ultimately are your client requirements.
I think when we get especially into that international conversation and we talk about just our frame of work, our body of work, our scope of work, we're talking about scale, enterprises and up, handling a ton of volume, a lot of scale, which is a lot of companies say that they can do, but not a ton can deliver on when the rubber meets the road. When we talk about thousands of devices spread across multiple sites nationally and globally, how do you personally and how do HOBI streamline to kind of give our partners that peace of mind and that repeatability?
I think for us, we're also fortunate to have an advanced software team. So our software team has created a very nice customized database. And when I say customized, it's customized to meet the requirements of every client. And so immediately once we receive an opportunity, we're able to, input all the necessary data into a system that is going to kind of provide us with some guidance. And, because when you talk about 15,000, 20,000 assets, that's a lot. And, you might have the most brilliant minds on the planet, but who's going to remember 20,000, who's going to remember the processing standards for 20,000 pieces of equipment?
Absolutely.
And so that's why you have to have a team capable of developing a software environment that has the capability to recognize those procedures and then is able to execute on them. And so that's why, we're fortunate, Craig himself, the president, has an engineering background. And when you talk to Craig about a database, he's able to give you answers that they sound so obvious, but because it comes off so simply from him, but in actuality, they're really complex answers. They weren't answers that were just developed overnight. And the same thing with Kathy too, Kathy Hill. When they give you an answer about a product, you know that, okay, yeah, that's a simple answer, but the reality is it's through experience and knowledge and really working through multiple talented engineers in order to create the best solutions for our clients. I think that's, I can sit here and anyone can sit here and say, oh, we can process 20,000, 25,000 assets, 30,000 assets, and we're going to give you the correct results. What Craig and Kathy have been able to do, especially in the last, I want to say the last 6 or 7 years, where they really are able to focus and start making huge improvements. I've definitely seen huge improvements in our processing standards and improvements that, a lot of organizations, it's easy to say you could do it, but then they really start executing on it. And once they start focusing on a problem, the solutions come, and it's something that stays within the HOBI, encyclopedia of processing knowledge. And, even today, I've seen our standards and, again, I'm not a HOBI auditor, but I've seen our, processing standards, you're looking at 1 month, 2 months, where, around COVID, I think around COVID, we were met with multiple challenges. For instance, sometimes, you would have a warehouse and a staff they would all have it. What are you going to do? But then, it also presented a lot of opportunities to get better, to make, to streamline efficiency, streamline operations. I think every company encountered challenging times during COVID, but when you have the correct leadership who was able to kind of focus and, figure out, okay, this is what we have to do to become a lot more efficient. And not only are we going to become more efficient during COVID, but we're going to become a lot more efficient as years progress. And that's what, we've been seeing now is kind of the fruits of all of the hard hours, the 60-hour weeks or whatnot.
Absolutely.
Coming to play, and it speaks through our remarketing results, and it speaks through our auditing results. And ultimately, we like to think it speaks through, client satisfaction, especially, I say in the last 3 or 4 years, our processing capabilities are, have, they improve every year. And like, say, like from 2025 to 2026, do they have to improve? Maybe. But we have been improving. Yeah. And I think that's what makes you, that's what helps kind of like breaks you apart from the pack, is the ability to say, okay, well, we can actually do a lot better here, so we should, as opposed to say, it's okay here, we're good here, and we've been fighting. I think a lot of successful organizations can fall into complacency And that's where I've seen that hobbies, when faced with a problem, it's grasped the problem, but then keeps working off of it. And
Absolutely.
it's a beautiful place to be.
It's so interesting. Just I feel like in ITAD and tech as a whole, the only way to catch the wave is before it happens. And so proactivity is the key to kind of staying ahead of the pack. And when you're trying to catch it when it's here or when it's already crested, I mean, it's just unfortunately it's too late. But I wanted to put a face to all of this. And I know like you were just a super stud and nothing ever goes wrong ever operationally. But if you
I'm
want
a scratch golfer. Come on, people are gonna know. I'm not a scratch golfer.
just walk just from a bird's eye view through like kind of the most complex or just a strikingly complex project you've worked on. What went sideways and what did your team do to have to kind of reel that back in, get it back on track and deliver?
I mean, I know exactly the project because it happens.
Hmm.
And there's an instance where, and I don't want to disclose too much information, but I'll disclose enough where the information it was an on-site project, and the information had to be captured, and it had to be captured via manually, and so a person would have to go through and uh, identify specific numbers on specific assets and make the connection. And it wasn't, again, this is a situation where sometimes you read a job and you think, okay, this is what it is. And then when you get on site, you're like, oh, that's not what it is.
Yeah.
And so when that happens, what I think, especially what makes me proud about telling the story is that, how we got boots on the ground right away. You dropped what you were doing, and even though that meant it's going to be a long day for you, you go and you help create a solution for a project that's, you drive 1 hour to this location and you start solving that problem.
Mm,
And when you are doing something manually and you don't have the ability, you don't have the luxury of using a scan gun,
right.
or even your cell phone should be able to capture a fair amount of data and be able to process into a spreadsheet, etc.
Hmm.
When you're a little limited in that fashion, it's nice to know that you're working with a team that's capable of, just doing really, I want to say, I'm trying to think of euphemisms right now, but work that takes time and
Right.
focus and is able to get the job done, and then is able to help appease the customer and make and satisfy the customer, and in this case it would be a client, and satisfy the client so much that that organization has actually followed up with us again in order to do the job again, in order to do the similar job. And
That'll do it.
that's, and again, I don't want to give too many details, but at least enough information so that, things can go sideways, you know, and that's, and sometimes that's human orientated, sometimes that's interpretation of emails. But if things do go sideways, then we have the capability to, and the teams and the structure to solve the problem, get it done, and ultimately provide you with the correct solutions.
That's awesome. That's so good. I think to wrap up, it's just with AI pushing just so much gear into the market. Do you have any closing remarks on just where you think ITAD logistics is headed, something you're excited about, and just a piece of advice you'd give a company that's interested in developing ITAD practices and working with HOBI?
Boy, that's a good question. Think for just 1 second. I don't think there's any question we're going to see more automation.
Hmm.
But what isn't commonly told is more automation. The result is more data. And if it is more data, and every machine has to learn data to become automated. But the segue to create, kind of even going back to the last question, the segue to understand the data and to start using it efficiently is through people, you know, and I mean, people still are going to play a huge, extremely important role in terms of taking the next steps and making our systems a lot more efficient, especially with artificial intelligence, the evolution of what might turn into artificial general intelligence. People are still going to be very much a part of it. I think everyone kind of has this idea that we're heading into a Skynet phase, and referring to the movie Terminator, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, and that's interesting to think about. I don't necessarily believe in that. I carry more of an optimistic perspective of where we're going to go as a whole. in a civilization. And I think the data that we're using right now is just going to make us better. It's going to, create a better world for everyone around us, especially, and in terms of the ITAD space, more data means the capability to track your equipment more. When a equipment is, going and leaving a facility, you're always going to know, and and we're already taking major strides to make that happen. But the ability to make that, and everyone can say they're 95, 97%, but you have the capability now to be 99.9, almost 100%. I mean, that's really exciting,
Absolutely.
And especially in a place where, there is environmental concern, no doubt about it. And we don't want to be in a situation where, we're not helping that. One of the beautiful, I mean, when I joined HOBI way back when, I mean, what I found so appealing was that it had the ability to not only do you have the ability to kind of repurpose product, extend the life of a product, but you're making if you do your job right, in theory, you should be able to make the world better.
Absolutely.
If you're not working for a company that isn't making the world better, I don't know. I mean, and ultimately that's kind of what you want to do. I'm not saying it's foolproof. I'm not saying it's done 100% of the, what I'm saying? It's like, it's easy for mistakes to occur, but you keep working until I like to think that we're headed on the right path, especially with artificial intelligence. And, especially if any company's getting into the ITAD space, I think it's an exciting time. Or if you're a client and you're looking to partner with an organization, it's an exciting time.
Absolutely.
We're able to provide results. We're able to make, the carbon impact panel that we're able to provide companies in terms of even saving energy. It's a huge step in the right. Those are huge steps in the right direction, and we plan on striving to make those steps.
Absolutely. Awesome, Dean. Well, I appreciate your time so much. The people appreciate your time so much. You can also email Dean with the tips on your golf swing as well.
No, I can't. I'm not very good, to be honest. I need the wind at my back to get the ball 260 yards. It's embarrassing.
Hey, 260 dead at the pin, though. I'm telling you.
No, dead in the water.
It happens to the best of us. Awesome, Dean. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, everybody, we're looking forward to sharing this with everybody as well. So
yeah,
thanks so much,
Steven. It's been great. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me or Steven, and if you have questions, just let us know.